Regardless of what training concept you select, there is a line in the sand for training readiness that is never going to be where you want it to be with respect to the readiness state of the hardware, the software, the operational concepts. For early space station training, specifically for the Expedition 1 crew, the Space Station Training Facility, or SSTF, was not in full operation. So there were a number of concepts and activities that we were teaching the crew in paper simulations. We would show them a paper copy of a portable computer display, show them how they would send a command, write down the telemetry that they would see and hand it back up to them. For some of their emergency training, we wound up doing tabletop simulations with a very small mock-up of the space station and little astronaut dolls. And we would ask the crew to illustrate their response. So there were concessions that were made, but the objectives of the training were very clear. But early on, we were able to accomplish those objectives using less than optimal techniques. For exploration, while it is a noble goal to have everything in place, the hardware, the software, the ops concepts, ready to go so that you can implement your training plan, in reality, it is very difficult to achieve. So my advice to you would be to have very clearly defined training objectives, and you may choose to meet those objectives differently for the first flight than you would once you have a better understanding of the operations and you're at a more mature level. But you need to make sure to understand the objectives up front.
Readiness for training. As we've discussed, you're never going to come up with a nice, cleanly defined point where the system is done, it's developed, it's 100% documented, you have perfect simulators and a perfect training system that's going to bring in an ops team, and they're going to go in one end of a training flow and out the other end, and they're going to be 100% efficient operators and flight controllers. The nature of what we do, and space station's been flying for at least parts of it for 15 years, but it's continuously evolving. Everything on board it is a prototype. There's only one or two of them in the world, and we may have only recently figured out how those one or two parts actually work, or we still may be in the process of figuring out how they work. So what you want to make sure is that your ground personnel, either before the first time something flies, or even as it's flying and you're learning lessons in post-flight, make sure that they have the opportunity to get their hands on real vehicle flight software, real vehicle hardware. Make sure that they're well integrated and know their counterparts in engineering and the development community that has built the stuff. And by the way, it goes both ways. When the development community understands how folks in the ops community are using their hardware, they are much better able to put together equipment and software that meets our needs. But I can't say enough for making sure that there's plenty of access to, as best as you can get at the real flight systems. It's far better to spend 8 hours with the software on a rig than 80 hours reading about the software. And that the converse is true. As I mentioned, one of the things that we try to do on Space Station is, as much as we can, we have individual disciplines like the communications. Flight controllers will invite their counterparts that develop the flight software that controls that equipment to come into the control center and watch it in real-time ops. And a lot of times that provides them some insights into how the software actually works in real time in a non-test environment where maybe you don't know how something is going to end when you start it. And every developer that we've brought in to do that has really found it to be a valuable exercise in just understanding how the ops community is exploiting their systems. For ground control team training, as we went from the shuttle model where the entire flight control team is in one room, we went to of course, a distributed model with control centers in Munich and Germany and Scuba, Japan and Moscow, and obviously payloads in Huntsville, Alabama, automated transfer vehicle control from Toulouse. One of the training challenges with distributing a team like that is it's a lot more methodical and frankly just slower to get that entire team up to the same level of proficiency and understanding as a team in one room. And you need to allow for that both in your your budgets to to allow, of all things, like international travel. There's nothing more valuable for training than making sure that these people interact on a personal level, but also just in some of the practical realities of when you are doing a simulation that involves multiple control centers. Some of those people are going to have to work off nominal hours or holidays. Holidays has been a particular issue because every country seems to have holidays that fall on the other ones. And these are real practical problems from distributing the ops. It's certainly not impossible, but the sort of things that you need to consider are things will probably take longer. You will have to fund international travel because technology is there that you can do. You can train and work out operational concepts using video cons, but to even find out who those people are and establish some sort of relationship, you can only do that on a personal level. And that was in particular important with our Russian colleagues, where that personal knowledge oftentimes would mean the difference between something that would take a day to resolve over a telecon and something that take many, many weeks of negotiation. Yeah, some things I've been thinking about, things to consider in terms of exploration and readiness for training, and having a group of people both on the ground and in space able to execute that mission is that, of course, space and the vehicles are the most valuable teachers. And without the vehicles until, 8 years from now to fly, we've got to look at ways that we can expose those teams to space operations, whether it's things that we do with the space station, whether it's ground analogs, whether it's taking people that work on space station now and using them to execute some of these missions down the road. I think a very important thing is that we don't lose the operational knowledge that we've gained through building the space station. And we're also able to project that forward into some of these additional missions that we're flying. And I guess one of the messages to give for exploration today is to start. You're going to want people when you're flying these missions that have experience doing real work in space. There's plenty of opportunities to do that. You want to start thinking about how I can exploit some of the opportunities that are available with the space station and all that we do with it to build kind of a level of experience to some of the personnel that later on we're going to draw upon to utilize in exploration. It's kind of funny. I actually got an anecdotal story now that I think about it. We talked about, a group of us, both current and former flight directors, went off and we're talking about how do we maintain this knowledge now that the shuttle has been retired, and we want to use a lot of that knowledge in the future programs. How do we do that? And one of the people that was in the office a while ago mentioned that between Apollo and shuttle, one of the things that we did was use the WB-57 up at Ellington, and I think the shuttle training aircraft as well. And that kind of built a lot of the engineering into the people that would eventually, that had started on Apollo and were down for a few years and went on to a shuttle. That was the program that they used kind of to bridge it. And then they asked us, I remember it was kind of funny, they asked us, what do you got now? And I kind of mentioned we had a 1,000,000-pound 6-man space station that's orbiting the Earth, and was that not good enough? So it kind of caused people to pause. But we have probably the best resource that we can have in kind of using it almost as a learning laboratory for people to really get some hands-on experience with stuff in space.